So before I introduce our speaker for today, I would like to remind you about the rules of our professional webinars. And these professional webinars are designed for English teachers in Kazakhstan to help you develop and learn more about different techniques and methods and resources that you can find online, and not only. I would like to ask you to mute yourself during the presentation because we are 13 here and some background noise might interfere with the presentation. But when the speaker will ask you or will let you ask questions, you can unmute yourself and ask questions. So, and today our webinar is about employing metacognitive strategies in an English for academic purpose writing course with Alexis Busa. And Alexis recently graduated with a master's in language teaching studies through the linguistics department at the University of Oregon. And she has also taught English to various proficiency levels and ages in Tunya, Columbia, and Spring. And also Alexis was a graduate instructor at the American English Institute at the University of Oregon, where she taught listening and grammar skills course. And soon after graduation, Alexis will be traveling to Tokyo, Japan to intern at Tokyo International University this fall. So Alexis, thank you so much for agreeing to present for us today. And now the floor is yours, and if you want, you can share your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Jelena.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just a reminder about keywords. So as we mentioned before in our emails and also during the webinars, we designed the system of keywords to register participants who were personally present during the webinar, because this is the requirement from CAST to issue you a certificate of attendance. So I see now that we are 14. So there are 11 participants, mine, if not to take into account the speaker, me, and my assistant. So if we have more, so please listen. Listen to the keywords that Alexis will be using at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of the webinar, and make sure you provide them in the feedback form that you have complete after the webinar. So Slava, can you help Dinara with sound? Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, what does everyone see? Can you see my slides?
Yes, I can see your slide about employing metacognitive strategies and some roadmap of the presentation on the right.
Oh, okay, we don't want that.
Okay. I guess you should click on that next to minus icon. Yeah, now it's full screen. Perfect.
Okay. Good morning or good evening, everyone. My name is Alexis, and as Jelena said, I'm going to be specifically talking about metacognitive strategies. And in this context, it will be for a writing class. And as you will learn, metacognitive strategies is something that can be used in all teaching contexts, not just writing courses. Okay, let's see. Okay, so today I'm just gonna give a little brief introduction, and then I'm gonna talk about some theories of metacognition and how it was developed and reasons why it's being used in language classrooms. And most of my presentation will focus on some ideas that we can do and ways to engage students in metacognition. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end, but I also have discussion questions throughout my presentation, and feel free to stop me and ask any questions that you may have, because I would like this to be interactive and engaging. Okay. And yeah, as Jelena said, I briefly taught at the University of Oregon in their American English Institute. And last Saturday, I graduated with my master's in language teaching. I also did my undergraduate studies at the university in international studies in Spanish. So I've been here for 5 years now, and I'm looking to travel to Southeast Asia and teach over there for a little bit.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you. Okay, you can move to the next one.
Okay.
Okay, so you have to click it. Oh no.
This one?
No, it's not fully loaded.
Oh, but so I still also have this PowerPoint being downloaded. As soon as it downloads, I will stop share and share the PowerPoint file, because now I'm sharing it from my email.
Okay, so as a warm up, I would like everyone to just do a little activity, and that is that I want you to think about how you decided what you were wearing today, and how you came up to that decision of the outfit that you chose, whether that's choosing the colors or choosing the patterns, and just think about the thinking process that you went through when you were making that decision. So you can do this on your own, but the goal is that you vocalize it.
Okay, so shall we write in the chat, or do we say it to all at once?
Yeah, if you're alone, it's okay you can unmute yourself. But if you're with someone, then you should tell them. I don't think anyone's with anyone. Yeah.
Okay.
The goal is that you're verbalizing that thinking process that you went through.
So would anyone like to share? Tatiana, Elmira, just unmute yourself and say something.
Everyone looks really busy. Oh, okay. So for example, I can give an example, and then you guys can think of how the process is like. So this morning I woke up and I thought, okay, I have to give a webcast today, so I would like to wear something nice. And then I also thought, but it's kind of cold, so I'm going to wear something warm and not something very light. And I thought black is a very simple color and it's not too distracting. And so that's how I decided what shirt I'm going to wear and the outfit that I'm going to wear for today. So that's just an example of the thinking process that I went through.
Shall I show next slide?
Yeah. Okay. It's missing pictures.
Let me do this and try to download the file again.
Okay, so I just want everyone to write one word in the chat box, and that is, when you hear the word metacognition, what do you think of? So just one word, and then you can write it to everybody.
Alexis, it's working now, so I'm sharing the PowerPoint.
Okay.
And it's completely downloaded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Here?
not that one. Not that one.
Which one? Like
Just
this?
this. Yep. Okay, yeah. So write one word when you hear the word metacognition. What do you think of? We have one response. I think about your ability to know your knowledge baggage and how you can use it. Mm-hmm. Okay. The reflection of the process of thinking. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all too much cognition. Yes, a lot of cognition. Okay, so the root word meta to analyze your think. Oh, here they all come. Thinking about thinking, thinking skills. Nice. Yes, that's essentially what the word metacognition means. So the word meta means beyond, and then cognition means the thinking process. So you can press the next one. So you can imagine that metacognition is something about beyond the thinking process. So it's not just what your thoughts are, but it's about regulating your thoughts and understanding and knowing your thoughts. So the word metacognition was a term that was coined by an American psychologist named John Flavel in 1979. And he argues that there's three types of knowledge that is involved in metacognition. So we have declarative knowledge, which refers to information pertaining to the individual. So this is all about your individual ability to perform a task or to do a task. And then we also have procedural knowledge, which refers specifically to the task and not the person. So this is your knowledge of the task, such as like the type of information that you already know, and then information that you need to know in order to accomplish the task. And then strategy knowledge, which is also known as conditional knowledge, is the type of information, is the knowledge of the strategies that you need to use to achieve that task. So all of these types of knowledges combined help us to become more aware of our cognition and how to effectively complete a task, essentially.
Next.
Okay, so here's kind of just an overview of how metacognition works. So when you undergo a task, you have the planning stage of what you're going to do. And then you engage in the thinking process and the cognitive processes. And then the metacognition comes in when you begin to monitor your thinking process and then evaluate it for its effectiveness. So you do a task and then you think about it and then you realize that that task wasn't effective for you or the way that you did it didn't help you. So then you evaluate it and you say, okay, this wasn't a good way for me to accomplish this task. What can I do differently to do well for it? And this is kind of just how the cycle works. And it's very recursive. So it's a constant flow of thinking, of regulating, and of monitoring that process. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about two theories of cognitive process that is specifically for writing courses. And the goal of both of these theories is to put writing and thinking together. So the first one we have is called the cognitive process theory of development. And it was created by Flower and Hayes in 1981. And as you can see here, it's very complex. Just like our thinking process. And there's three main different categories. The first one is the task environment. So it's referring to the actual task that you have to do. And then we have the writing process. And then finally, we have this engagement in our working in our long-term memory. So this is like information that we already know and that we're trying to retrieve because we already learned it. And so we're trying to understand how can it apply to this task that I'm doing. You can press next. So I would like for us to focus on the writing process specifically and kind of how this works. So Flower and Hayes argues there's three main components of a writing process. We have the planning stage, which is before the writing happens, and it's when we engage learners in ways to organize their thoughts. Usually that's done through an outline. You can also do it through a mind map, which I'll talk about later, and even free form writing. So just ways for them to generate ideas about what they want to write about before they begin the writing task. And then we have the translating stage, which is when learners translate information from text and from their knowledge to their writing. So that's kind of when most of the writing happens. And then finally is the reviewing stage, which we know as when learners edit and evaluate their writing. And this is often done through peer feedback and peer evaluation. And then again, I want to point out that this is all constantly being monitored. So that's the important thing to remember, is that in each of the writing stages, learners are constantly monitoring their comprehension of the task and what they're doing. And then as much as possible, engaging in information that they've already learned and that they need to learn to complete the task. So Flower and Hayes argues that all of this process is very hierarchical. So that means that learners are constantly going from the different stages without any particular direction. And that's why there's multiple arrows going up and down and side to side. You can press the next one. Yeah, and this is kind of what I was mentioning earlier. These are kind of the two main arguments. And they also say that writing is...
Sorry, shall I go back?
Yes, just for a little bit. One of their main important arguments is they say that writing is a goal-directed thinking process. So this means that in the beginning, learners should be creating their writing goals and their learning goals, and then they should be going back to those goals. So that's another way to monitor how they're doing and if they're achieving the goals that they want to achieve for their writing. And then the other theory for writing is called self-regulated strategy development. And as you can see here, it has 6 main stages in order to engage learners in the writing process. And it starts with the teacher just developing and activating the learner's awareness for the writing task. And then they have a discussion about when they should do it, how they should do it, and why they should engage in that cognitive process. And then the third stage is kind of the most important stage, and that is that the teacher has to model that process in order for students to see how it's done. Because oftentimes it's very challenging for learners to engage in metacognition, and they themselves, it's not something that they often do. And so they have to see the teacher do it first. And then they emulate it and or memorize the process of how it works, and the teacher supports them. And then finally, they become independent performers. And this is the goal of metacognition, is that they become autonomous because they become very aware of their thinking process and of their learning abilities and their weaknesses and their strengths in learning. You can go to the next one. Okay, so here's an image of what a lot of us look like. So as you can see here, we think a lot of things, but we say very little things. Okay, so I would like everyone to engage in a little bit about a discussion. So now that you've learned about the different theories of metacognition for writing, how do you think that we can get students to think more deeply about their writing? What are some suggestions or ways that we can do this so that students understand it? You can just write your response in the chat. Perhaps giving them some forms to identify their writing problems. Yeah. Oh, motivation. Peer evaluation. Yes, we'll talk about that. Assessment. Evaluation. A lot of peer assessments. Yes. Okay.
Next.
We'll continue. Okay, so here are some strategies that we can use for metacognitive development. I first tried to speak with them. Yeah. So I will talk about a few of these in the sample activity section, but I wanted to go over a few of them. So we have concept and mind mapping, and then as mentioned, also setting writing goals is really important. And then I'm going to talk about 2 different types of think aloud protocols. And then there's an activity called self-questioning that they do in their writing that they've already finished. Oh yes, someone just wrote questioning. That's correct. And then a lot of you said peer evaluation and assessment, so that's where the revising and editing part comes in. And then we also have working with higher order thinking skills and questions and simplifying their problems. So these are just a few ideas that you can do for your writing classes. Jelena.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so now I would like you guys to think about some of the benefits of employing metacognition in a language classroom. So I mentioned a few earlier, but try to think of some more benefits. It's very specific. You can also develop speaking skills. Achieve better results. Yeah, that's a really important one. The learners become leaders or agents of their learning experience. Yes, it's very active learning. With 20 participants. Okay. Introspection. Ah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So now I would like you to think about some of the disadvantages of employing metacognition in the classroom. So all of you guys said some really good benefits, and these are all very true. It's very active. It's very learner-centered. And they really get to own their learning because they're becoming so aware. But what are some disadvantages? Takes a lot of time. Yeah, it's a huge obstacle. So it may slow down the process. Time limit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good statement. Students may be uncertain. We'll talk about that some more. Did you? Okay. You can move to the next one. Okay, so here's, many of you mentioned some of these advantages. So I mentioned earlier, learners really become aware of what their strengths and weaknesses are in writing because they recognize what strategies are not working for them and what is working for them. It also fosters student autonomy because once they understand this, then they're able to learn on their own, and that is the goal of metacognitive strategies. And then overall, it really improves the cognitive development because it gets them to really think about their processes of thinking and their writing. And then we also talked about how it engages learners in higher order thinking skills. And these are all the things that we want to be encouraging learners to do in the classroom, which in Bloom's taxonomies includes evaluating, synthesizing, and applying. And these are some of the challenges that many of you have mentioned as well. Because metacognition is something that students haven't really engaged in many of their other classrooms, it can be really uncomfortable and awkward for them to do themselves. And one of the activities I'm going to talk about involves verbalizing their thinking process, similar to what we did in the warm-up. And this is not something that many students do very often. So it can feel really strange and different. And many may feel hesitant to do that just because it seems really weird to talk out loud about your thinking process. But when you do this, you really become more aware. And then similarly, it's also a challenge for instructors because in order for instructors to be able to employ metacognitive strategies in the classroom, they also have to understand how their thinking process works. Because one of the main stages of it is that they have to model that thinking process. And if it's not something that they have done before or are really aware of, then it can be really challenging. And then, of course, with assessments, how can we really know that learners are applying these strategies to their writing? Like with any classroom, how can we be certain that they're doing what we're asking them to do and that they're applying these techniques? And so we'll talk about some ways to mitigate these challenges in the classroom. All right, so now I'm going to get into some sample activities and ideas that we can do. So as mentioned previously, the first one is mind mapping, or also called concept mapping. And this is an example that I did for a unit that I was designing on food scarcity and poverty. And oh, this was
It's
used.
okay. Sometimes our participants or their kids draw on the speaker's presentation. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So this is
They
used
liked
to,
your map. Sorry.
it's okay. This is used through an application called Kaggle. It's free, students can use it, and students can also share the mind map with their friends, and they can all edit and work together in real time without having to be together. There's other applications. There's one called Mind Master, which is very similar. So there's lots of tools out there that students can use specifically for mind mapping. And as you can see, it's a way for students to visually see their thinking process and how those thoughts and ideas are connected together. And this kind of differs from the traditional, very structured outlines that many students use. That's very linear. And then this one is more fluid, and they can, it's also fun, and they can add, pictures and change the colors to show the connections. So I really like using Kaggle. It has some limitations, but overall it's really effective. So this is a type of activity that you would do before they begin their writing process, and just as a way for them to get to thinking about what it is that they want to write about, and then visually see how the ideas come together.
Okay.
And then it has some weird numbers. Yeah, so this is not really an activity, but it's a way to assist learners in the thinking process, and it's called a procedural facilitation. So it's basically any type of handout or worksheet that you give students that asks them questions throughout their writing so that they're thinking about these questions. So this is an example for a narrative writing task. So you have before the writing, creating an awareness for learners of what type of tasks that they're doing. And then you have the during the writing process, which is when they monitor themselves. So how many drafts will I write? What will I mainly focus on? What kind of techniques will I use? And then you have the after they finish their writing. And this is usually during the editing phase and how they're going to evaluate themselves. So are they making their progress towards the goals that they set earlier? And how can they improve their writing for their next draft? So this is just a way to get students to be thinking about these steps and these processes. You don't necessarily have to have them answer these questions, but as they're writing, it's really nice to have this type of think sheet next to them so that they can monitor and see, okay, I did these things and now I can move to the next stage. Okay, and then as mentioned earlier, I talked about a type of activity called self-questioning. And this happens after, it can happen after the first draft or the second draft, but definitely after they finish their writing. And it's basically when students have written their paper and then they go back and read their paper and they self-question aspects of the paper that they've already written. So some sample questions that they can ask themselves is, does this sentence flow into the next one? Are the ideas that I'm trying to convey being conveyed to the audience? And then they can also ask if they see a sentence and if there's another effective way to say that sentence. So it kind of requires them to go back and to read their paper out loud so that they can really see the connections and to self-question their ideas, self-question their writing. And it doesn't have to all be questions. It can be just ideas or feedback or suggestions. And it happens in the margins of their papers. This is an example of a paper that I wrote where you can just simply in Microsoft insert comments on the margins, and instructors can do this, and then students can respond in the margins as well, and it gets the ideas flowing. And again, it's another way for them to revise their paper and to look back at it again. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about two types of Think Aloud protocols, and these are really popular strategies that teachers use in a metacognitive classroom. So the first one is called a retrospective Think Aloud protocol, and it's basically when the learners have already completed the task and they verbalize their thinking process while reflecting on that task. And then this differs from the concurrent Think Aloud protocol, which means students are given a task in the moment, and then they have to verbalize their thoughts while completing the task. These can be done in many different ways. So for example, you can have students film themselves going through the process of thinking about the task or reflecting in the retrospective one. And then you can have students annotate aspects of the video that they want to analyze and then reflect on what that process was like. And they can really see, oh, I think like this, so I do this during this time. The concurrent Think Aloud, both of these processes would require lots of space where students can't be heard, or you could also assign the task at home, but just to ensure that they do know how to do it and that it is something that they're able to do on their own before they actually do it. It also requires a lot of technology, so they kind of have to have access to these types of technologies to be able to do these Think Alouds. But if you didn't want them to film themselves, then they could also just simply practice it in the classroom as well. So here's an example of an in-class flip writing station. I'm not sure, does everybody know what an in-class flip is, or what a flipped learning classroom is? If you don't know, just type no into the chat box. Yes?
I think a lot of our teachers are familiar with the flipped classroom technology.
Are familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So the only difference is that the in-class flip, it accounts for students' lack of access or resources to support outside of the classroom. So if you have many students that maybe have multiple jobs or have other responsibilities and aren't always able to finish the task, they can come into class and have the opportunity to finish. So as you can see here, I've created 5 different stations, and the only 2 ones that are mandatory are the first and the last station. And students who haven't finished will have to go to the first station. And ideally, they would have had somewhat of a start on the first draft already, so they're not just beginning it in the previous class. And then in station 2, they will be doing some type of peer feedback. In station 3, we have the reflection. I have some prompts and questions to engage them in the writing task and the writing strategy that they're using. And then in station 4, I talked about the self-questioning activity. And then the goal is that they will all be able to go to station 5, where they actually begin the process of writing the second draft. And this is where the instructor will spend most of their time, is in the last station, because that's when they're really engaging in those higher order thinking skills. This really benefits learners because they can choose, aside from the first and last station, between 2, 3, and 4, which ones they want to go to, which ones they want to spend more time on. And all of them are individual except for station 2, in which they will need a partner for the peer feedback. But they would have to have gone through all the stations before beginning their writing of the second draft. And then depending on the context, this was designed for a 2-hour class, and they would be doing this for the whole 2 hours. So they would have plenty of time to start writing their second draft. Yes, as you can see here. Okay, and now I'm going to talk about a type of kind of peer feedback, but it's called peer collaboration, and it differs slightly from the peer feedback. Peer feedback usually happens at the end of the writing stages when students have already written their drafts and they're having their peers look through them. The difference in this one is peer collaboration happens at the beginning of the writing stages before they begin to write. And it's a task that involves partners, and one student is the writer and the other student is the supporter. So as you can see here, these are their roles. The goal of the writer is to come to class with a plan, and they have to explain what they're thinking about writing about and their plan for what they will do for the writing task. And the goal of the supporter is to be an active listener and to offer comments and suggestions. And what I really like about this type of task is that the writer becomes the active recipient of news and suggestions. In the peer feedback, the writer is a passive receiver. So they're being told what to do, how they should do their writing, and offering suggestions and comments. And in this particular activity, they are the person who's telling the other person about their writing ideas. So this gives them the opportunity to really explain and explore what it is that they want to write about. And traditionally, the peer collaboration would have handouts and prompting questions for the supporter to ask the writer if they need that extra assistance. And then also we have the peer feedback, which is a very important part of metacognition because it gets them to go back and to look at their papers. So this is kind of a very simple peer feedback for an argumentative writing paper. And the important part is that the partner has to identify where it is that they find that particular question in the paper. So they're ensuring that it's not just something that they think they saw, but that they could actually say, oh, in this part, this person did this, or in this next part, they did this part of the task. And then, of course, offering suggestions. Okay. So I'd like everyone to think about this discussion question and then write it in the chat if you feel like responding. So for your teaching context, how do you think that you could integrate metacognition into your classrooms? What are some ways? It doesn't have to be just a writing classroom. What are some ways that you can use metacognition? Nothing. Yes. Collaboration. Mm-hmm. What's an ARW class?
Maybe academic? No.
Reading and writing?
I don't know. Solia, could you specify, please?
Yes,
Academic reading and writing.
in writing. Okay. Yeah, definitely. So, Jelena, you say you're not sure about how to introduce mind mapping in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by this?
So I know that mind mapping is very useful in organizing ideas, but I'm not sure how can I introduce it in the classroom. So do I ask students to make a mind map before writing some essay?
Before you do it?
So do I ask the learners to make a mind map before writing some essay and
Oh,
like demonstrating them how to make a mind map and then ask them to come up with some mind map for their topic?
yes.
Is
And
this
mind
the way?
mapping is,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, mind mapping is also commonly used for taking notes.
Oh,
In fact, like many students, that's how they do it, and they don't realize that they're actually doing mind mapping. Um, and there's some videos out there on YouTube about how to do it, but the idea is that you would first do it with them for a task, and then so you would just draw out, on the board. Okay, this is the topic of our writing task. What are some ideas that I have for this? And you draw some ideas, and then they can really see that process. See what we have. Students divide the work, prepare their writing presentations, discuss in pairs and in large groups, discussing hot questions. I think that's an acronym for something. Must enable students to achieve some progress. I like the drawings.
it happens every time.
Okay. Okay. So all of it, oh, I won't mention all of it. I really like this quote. It resonated with me a lot. And that Garner says, to make an individual metacognitively aware is to ensure that the individual has learned how to learn. It reminds me of the Confucius saying, which is that to feed a man, to give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. To teach a man how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And that's kind of the goal of metacognition, because with it, the individual is more aware of their writing and their thinking process. So I hope that going forward today, that everyone can integrate some type of metacognition into both their daily lives and in the classroom. When I was writing the research paper on this, I was always thinking about my thinking process and what I was thinking about when I was doing different types of activities. And really, it can be anything. Just a simple task of deciding what clothes you're going to wear or performing a particular task. Just being aware of your thought processes throughout your daily lives. And metacognition, as I said earlier, is adaptable to all learning contexts. When it originally came out, it was for math and science courses and not for language courses, because in math, there's types of problem solving where you have to start from the end and then go backwards. You have to really think about each stage of the math problem and how it contributes to the solution. So it's very similar to a writing course. And yeah, I just hope that you not only become more aware of your thinking process, but how you can engage learners in their thinking process. And with that, I would like to conclude with any questions that people have for me. You can contact me at my AOL because my uOrgan isn't going to work anymore. And then you can also connect with me on LinkedIn if you have further questions.
So, Alexis, we also have a tradition to include some questions from the participants later after the webinar when they complete the feedback form. Then, like in about 10 to 14 days, I organize these questions together and send to the speaker, and then ask the speaker to provide the answer, so that not to take much of your time and not to email you questions one by one.
Okay.
So I will share the feedback form with the participants tomorrow, and you will also have an access, so you will be able to see all the questions and their feedback. Okay, so your questions, please, and you're welcome to unmute yourself if you have a question.
Yeah, you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
It's very cute. Story. Maybe you think you have it, but you might have a question still.
I have a question, but I will wait for others. Actually, this is a question from one of the participants from the previous webinar.
Okay.
Okay, so the question is, I remember one of the participants asked, do you know some strategies or maybe some tips how to check learners' writing pieces using not so much time, and how to effectively check them and not spend too much time for that?
Are they referring to like a rubric, like how to grade students' writing?
Yeah.
Without spending a lot of time.
Yeah. So I also mentioned the rubric, or some speaker mentioned the rubric. But do you have any other strategies? Maybe you can share how you grade students' writing.
I spend a lot of time grading students' writing. And that's actually like one of the issues that was like I came about when I was reading the literature review. And that's that most teachers, they don't really enjoy teaching writing courses because it does take a lot of time. And then a lot of students kind of shy away from writing courses because of the amount of time it takes them. And I think with all the different stages of writing, it's very, very important to evaluate each stage because it confirms that students are engaging in them. So for example, in my writing classroom, I have several different stages, and each one is worth a percentage of the total. So students cannot just complete the last draft. In fact, I think the last draft is only worth 20% of the total grade, and the first draft is worth more than that because it's an incentive for students to perform and do well on that very first task. But after reading the first draft, it will be very easy to see how their writing has developed between the first and the third draft. So by the time you get to the second and third, it's easier to see and it's a lot faster to read as well. So I think it's important to spend a lot of time on the first draft and providing that feedback, because I know as myself as a learner, I really, really valued that feedback from the instructor. And then I personally would give individual comments and feedbacks on each student's paper when they submitted it electronically. You can also kind of just give like a comprehensive, like, overall, I saw these things, these are some ideas that I have, and it can just be very quick bullet points if you are just grading for essential components of the writing instead of looking at every single aspect of it.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to share some of the strategy that one of the speakers shared with us. Maybe some participants remember Anna's presentation from Kazakhstan, and she shared a strategy of sending a video presentation to students.
A video presentation?
So actually, I did this too in my online courses. So I open Zoom and share a screen with a piece of writing, and then record what I think about the writing. But of course, I don't like grade and highlight grammar and other mistakes. I do it in a Microsoft Word, but as for coherence and cohesion, structure, vocabulary, and
organization,
and other criteria, this could be done in so I use voice and I show with a mouse those places in the writing task, which I liked a lot, and which are some areas for improvement.
I really like that. Yeah. Did you feel like that took a lot of time in order to make the video, to go through the paper?
No, to make a video and to record this. So I read through the essay, I have some ideas, and then I make a 2-3 minute video. And this is much faster than sending an email, a very detailed email to the student. If you want, I can share you some of mine, so with the participants too, so that you can see how it works.
Yeah, I would really like to see that. And did you find the students were responsive to that? They liked hearing feedback in that way?
Yeah, but of course, as you cannot, well, actually you can mention some grammar slips, but this should be done, I guess, at level B2. Because if you're doing it with A1 or A2 learners, it's a kind of hard. Also, I think this can be used only when they are B2 levels.
Yes, their hearing proficiency has to be much higher.
Yeah. So Dinara, I will answer your question. So tomorrow you will receive an email with a link to the feedback form. After every webinar, the participants complete this feedback form. You have to provide your name, your last name and email, and some comments for the speaker, and your questions if you have, and also the 3 words. So any questions or comments for Alexis? So if you have some questions, you can provide them in the feedback form, and then I will make sure to send them to Alexis, and I'm sure Alexis will be happy to provide the answers. So Alexis, is it okay if I share the PowerPoint you sent to me today with the participants?
Yes, that will be okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I will also make an attachment of this PowerPoint that Alexis was using today. So thank you so much for agreeing to present for us today, and this is a wonderful presentation. I had several insights. Maybe I should think about using metacognition more in my classroom. So thank you so much, and I hope that I wish you a very nice trip to Tokyo. I guess it's a very long flight from US. It's much longer than US to Kazakhstan. And I hope that if you have some other interesting presentations, you are welcome to present for our webinars again in the future.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay.
Maybe someday I will go to Kazakhstan.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So Alexis' colleagues are peers and her classmates are coming to Kazakhstan to teach for Yesenov Language Center. So let the guys check this place first. And then they will share if it is okay or not okay, and then you will come next year or maybe during second term. Yeah, you're welcome.
That sounds like a
Okay,
great
so
plan.
dear participants, thank you so much for joining us today, and I will update you with the emails about our next webinars. And thanks again, and I will send you all the information with the email tomorrow, and also the recording of this webinar. You can share it with your colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. How do we...